Hello, bonjour and welcome to your new Bonheur Private Wine video. I hope you are all doing okay. Today I want to continue exploring with you the terminology of wine, and even beyond that, let's explore an interesting concept that is definitely worth grasping to taste and understand wine better, and to eventually enjoy further the variety that wine has to offer, appreciate further which wine you like more than others and why. And this concept you'll often hear wine people and connoisseurs talk about, including myself, and this is what we call the body of wine. Like for people, there are different morphologies for different wines, and it's not that some are better than others, we're not judging here, but it's interesting to understand which type of wine works best with each tasting occasion, or for pairing with different types of food as well. So let's explore what is the body of wine. Let's go. In previous videos here, we've explored what wine is made of, and that's essentially just a few things. A lot of water, yes, which is the base of wine as a solution, something around 30% ethanol or say alcohol, some glycerol, and we'll get back to glycerol in just a few minutes, and some acids. Then of course wines have more or less sugar, and red wines, mainly red wines, have tannins. Although of course there are aromas, plenty of aromas as well in wine, but they don't impact on what we're talking about here much. They play a role more on the smell of wine and the flavors of wine. So wine is a fairly complex medium, although not that complicated when you break things down. These, say, 7 main components result in forming the taste of wine, the flavors of wine if you wish. Although flavors and taste are very generic terms that encompass all of the interactions with your senses, the taste proper, the smell, the sensation on the palate. All of this is encompassed in those very generic terms. The texture of wine is how it feels on your mouth. Does it feel oily? Does it feel harsh and drying? Does it feel smooth and silky? Or does it feel granulous on the palate? Thin or voluptuous? This is the texture of wine, which is separate from whether a wine tastes acidic or sweet. The texture is the sensation a wine gives you on your palate. Like the texture of a surface is completely different, distinct, and independent from its color, right? Now, the body of wine is a subpart, a component of the texture. If you would put the sensations that the tannins, the alcohol, the acids give to your palate, all of those aside, you'd end up with how oily or how viscous a wine is when you taste it. This is what we call the body of wine. But that was all perhaps very theoretical and abstract. Let me make a simple comparison with another everyday life beverage to illustrate this simply better so you understand it better. I heard this comparison for the first time when I lived in New Zealand on the other side of the planet, and I was attending a wine course by Bob Campbell, Master of Wine there. And he explained that the best way to understand the body of wine, to my surprise, is to think of the different types of cow milk, I know, cow milk, that you can buy. Let me explain. So a full-bodied wine gives a tasting sensation somewhat like whole milk does. It's oily, it's round, it's rich and creamy on your mouth, right? While a light-bodied wine is like a low-fat or non-fat milk. It's thin, it's light, and it's somewhat watery, right? It doesn't hold on your palate, no viscosity, it just flows like water, just like a light-bodied white wine would. And in between are what we would call the medium-bodied wines, which we would compare with reduced fat milk. A little bit oily, not too watery, but not too richly creamy either. And of course, most wines are in and around this median category. Not too big, not too rich. Like in most things in nature, there's a bit of a Gaussian distribution for wines around this medium-bodied category, with most wines somewhere on one side or the other around the middle. Think about this comparison next time you taste a wine or a few wines, even better, and compare how they feel, and you'll experience that there is a very notable difference between a rich red, for example, versus a light white, to take the two extremes on that scale. A real difference on how oily and mouth-filling, how viscous they feel. And that's exactly the body of wine. I am guessing if chapter 1 and 2 made any sort of sense at all in your mind, you can probably already foresee how the body of a wine is going to play out on how different wines have different taste profiles. Let's take some extreme examples again in wines of different colors to keep it simple and self-explanatory. You probably already experienced how an oaked Chardonnay tastes much ampler, much oilier on the palate compared to a light and crisp unoaked Chardonnay. And that's because oak aging generally goes with aging on lees. That's a bit of a technical winemaking term, but aging on lees, which increases the oily texture of a wine. And it's also because bigger oaked Chardonnay come from riper grapes with more alcohol and more glycerol. Now this glycerol thing is this byproduct of the alcoholic fermentation, perfectly natural. Sometimes it's called glycerine, and that might ring the bell a little bit better. And the glycerol is oily, it's a little sweet as well, and there's much more of it in a richer, riper wine like in an oaky Chardonnay. Same thing for red wines. If you think of a hot, powerful Napa Cabernet versus a thin Pinot Noir, right? Beyond the fact that the Pinot has less tannins, less color and everything, it also has less body. It just feels lighter and more watery on the palate. Smoother, lighter, more watery as well. The same goes with rosés, even though there's less extreme variability between different styles of rosé. Briefly on the impact of body on the taste of wine. The body of a wine participates in what we call the balance of a wine. The balanced interactions between acidity, sweetness, astringency, the tannins, etc. Now the body smoothens the acidity and the harshness of a wine, a little bit like sugar or sweetness would do, by neutralizing the harsh and sour sensations. But the great thing about the body is that it doesn't really feel sweet at all. So you can have a full-bodied wine that is dry, just like, again, a big full-bodied Chardonnay. The goodness on an oily wine without the sweetness. While most sweet wines are going to have a fuller body because sugar brings in and it comes in with a rich body as well. You can't really have a sweet wine that would be light-bodied, although I guess a light sparkling Moscato maybe would be somewhere around there. Anyhow, as I hinted on earlier, we're not body shaming wines here. Light-bodied wines are great when we want something lighter, more thirst-quenching, more refreshing, simpler to appreciate with a summer meal, for example, or for appetizers before a meal, or with seashells, with oysters, for example. Typical example, you want something light and crisp there, not something oily and full-bodied. While of course full-bodied wines may appear more suitable, more warming and comforting in winter when it's cold, or with a more powerful dish, with flavorsome dishes that might just overwhelm completely a light-bodied wine. Different wines for different occasions, as always, but I hope you've been able to grasp this little but very important nuance that is so impactful on how we taste and appreciate wine, this body of wine. And let's leave it here for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Au revoir.